Hey dudes and dudettes, Smitty here with another video for you. Today's standard in this video is going to cover techniques and elements of fiction. There's not a lot that we need to cover in this section, but it seems like there's so much because there is so much to know about fiction. But I'm going to do my best to make it super easy for you to understand, as usual, right? So let's go ahead and get started. Fiction is made up by an author. We know that. We know that fiction isn't real, but there's some nitty-gritty that we need to get into that I don't think you all are understanding yet. But again, I'm going to make sure you understand by the end of the video. Even though some of it might seem familiar to you, fiction is, I promise you, made up. But authors base some opinion, some decisions that they make when they write on things around them. So that's why it might seem familiar to you. Also, some of it might have similarities to real-life events, and that's because authors have to feed their imagination. And in order to feed their imagination, they use the worlds around them. It still means it's made up, though. It's fiction. And finally, even though it might have similarities to real-life people, those people can't be used in a fictional story because they would have a little something called a lawsuit against the author. So even though an author may base some events on real people that they've come across, they can't use those people. These people are actually made up, and it's very important to remember that. So what does fiction look like? Fiction looks like a lot of things. You're going to see up here a note that someone wrote to their mom. Dear Mom, I'm spending the night at Kristen's. We are studying. Love me. Now, that's fiction because actually this girl and Kristen are going to a local nightclub. I don't want to say bar. Bar's not right. They're going to a local nightclub. They're going to hang out all night. So that's kind of fiction. She's telling her mom a little story there. We also see fiction in movies like Avatar. That's made up, right? That's not real. We also see fiction in music videos. Now, you may not realize that that's fiction, but it is. These people aren't acting out their real lives. They are fictional characters within their own videos. They're made up. Also in the lyrics of songs. Then also in novels, like The Hunger Games, that's fiction. That's made up. And something like Monsters, Inc., lots of Disney comes up when I think of fiction. That, of course, is all made up. And finally, we have another form, poetry. And poetry can be fictional. So they all look different, but what it comes down to is all of these things are made up. They come from the brain of the author. So, where do these ideas come from? Like I said, authors of fiction have to make decisions about their stories, and a lot of times they look to the world around them to make these decisions. So, how will I get my readers interested in my story? Why am I writing this story? What is my purpose? Who will be in my story? And what conflicts will they face? Who will tell my story? Where and when will my story take place? That's a biggie. How will my story unfold from beginning to end? Am I going to have flashbacks or am I going to just tell it in the order that it happened? And what do I expect readers to learn or recall after reading my story? So, I'm going to introduce you to somebody today. It's our author. So, I'm an author. And he's going to take us through the decision-making process that he uses to create a piece of fiction. So, first question that was posed to our author is, the author's sitting around thinking, and he says, well, how will I get my readers interested in my story? Ebola, yikes. He was sitting around one day watching TV, and he saw this Ebola outbreak. And this is huge, and this is affecting thousands of people right now, but millions of people are at risk for contracting this terrible, deadly disease. So he says to himself, well, this is affecting millions of people, so I bet they'll be interested in a story about the Ebola virus. So there you go, a story is born. Is it based on something real? Yes, but he's going to make it up from beginning to end. He's going to make decisions. So let's see what other decisions he makes. Why am I writing this story and what is my purpose? Authors write with a purpose. They don't just go around purposelessly jotting things down and trying to make stories out of them. They have a purpose. They want you to get something from whatever they write. So there's a reason they write the story. Now, considering our Ebola story, the author says, I think more people should be aware that it can happen to them. What if their loved ones were dying? So I will write in such a way as to persuade them to take action. Now that's going to be an interesting thing to see how an author can do that, how he can persuade through his writing. So his next decision is, who will be in my story? What conflicts will they face? Because the story is no fun unless somebody's going through something, right? I mean, if I said to you, hey, I woke up this morning and went to the store, you'd be like, that is the worst story I've ever heard in my life. Because nothing happened to me. There is no story. That's a statement. That's not even a story. So somebody has to go through something. There has to be people in the story, characters, and they have to face something. Next question is, who will tell my story? Somebody has to tell the story. Sometimes it's a person in the story, sometimes not so much. We're going to learn about that too. Finally, where and when will my story take place? This has to make sense, okay? You can't have a medieval story with knights and horses set in modern day Russia. It doesn't make sense, okay? It doesn't make sense. Now, you can do that creatively, but that's something different. We're not talking about that. We're talking about fiction that makes sense. So it has to have a setting and time that makes sense to the reader. So here's our Ebola story. I got it. I'll have a father as the main character. That's who will be in my story. He lives in the USA in present day and time in a made-up town. I have to make up the town because then people who live in a town, if I named an actual town, would be like, oh my gosh, is that true? Is that happening here? You would confuse people, and don't forget, this author wants to make this up. So it has to be a made-up town. Although a lot of people use New York as their town, but we'll forget that for now. So his younger daughter contracted Ebola, but they can't afford the proper medical care. All right? I'll have the daughter tell the story from her point of view because the readers will relate to her with more sympathy. So the author just made a ton of decisions here. He made up the father, he made up the place, but he used a common thing that everybody can relate to, this Ebola outbreak that's going on. His youngest daughter contracts the virus. Now, everybody has a soft spot in their heart for kids. So this author made a decision. He said, I'm going to make her tell this story. So we're going to have this story from her point of view. So we just covered a lot of that author's decisions right. Oh, and this author says to himself, you know, I should include a lot of dialogue or conversations between my characters, which is the definition of dialogue, context clues, because that's a great way to learn about a character. And I want them to relate to my characters. So they should talk to each other. We should find out things from my character. And imagery. Lots of imagery, because I want my readers to be able to see, hear, feel, taste, and smell exactly what the characters do. So imagery must have something to do with describing things in such a way so as the reader can actually feel, taste, smell, see. They have to be really vivid descriptions, this author says to himself. And that brings us to our next question. How will my story unfold from beginning to end? What decision am I going to make about that? Well, author says, the exposition or the beginning, which is another name for exposition, beginning, they're synonymous, will introduce my characters in the setting. That's what an exposition does. It kind of sets the story up. The rising action will show how they are visiting their family in another country. Okay, so that sets up some of this action here, like, oh boy, you know, there's been reports on this fake news because the author is going to choose to include that, and they're going to a country. So you're getting action now. You're starting to worry about these characters. This is when the young daughter will contract Ebola. We'll see a lot of heartache as the family is turned away from medication and treatment because of money problems. Then the climax will be, though, after they climb this big mountain of action, there's going to be a climax. There's going to be this point in the story where everything changes, and a doctor offers to treat the young girl for free, and she shows signs of improvement. Yay! The following action will involve the family becoming involved in educating their community on how to stop the transmission of the virus if they travel to another country. So there we go. We have an entire plot already set out with beginning, action, climax at the top, following action, and then the end. So he already knows how his story is going to unfold. Great job, author. And finally, what do I expect readers to learn or recall after reading my story? This is something called theme, and everybody can relate to things that they read. Did I achieve my purpose? That's the other question the author's asking himself after he puts this all together. After reading my story, my readers will remember how important it is to be educated on the dangers around them and to look out for family, friends, and others. Now, this is the author speaking, remember. And he says they're going to remember that there are dangers lurking everywhere. They will feel compelled compelled to help in the fight against this Ebola epidemic because the setting is a place just like where they live, so the readers can relate to it. We see through the characters that it can happen to anyone. They will like my characters. That's important, to be able to relate to characters, made up characters in a story. And they will begin to imagine, what if? And that is going to motivate them to get involved and to do something helpful. So my purpose to persuade them will be accomplished. So in review, just a few things to remember, because we did kind of go over a lot here. In review, remember, fiction is made up but might have characters, places, and events that are familiar. This is done on purpose. It's an author decision. Fiction takes many different forms, including poetry, notes, songs, novels, short stories, narrative essays, movies, and so much more. Fiction authors make decisions. These stories are based on something. They're based on something in the world around them. Remember that. And authors generally include all of the elements of a story when they write: characters, point of view, setting and mood, plot, theme, dialogue, imagery, and these are all carefully created in their minds. And finally, authors have a purpose when they write and may just want to entertain you, or they may want to motivate you by making you relate to the character, setting, and events so that you are actually driven to do something after reading their story. So that's it, guys and gals. I know it seems like a lot, but you got this. Ain't no thing. I'll see you in class.